Thank you both for joining us today to talk about your run for Attorney General. We're with Michael Cross and Will Lathrop, who are both running for the Republican nomination. And if we can just start off by having each of you give a brief introduction about who you are and why you're running. And why don't we start with Michael?
Yeah. Okay, sure. So, right, Michael Cross here. Thanks for inviting me. My website is michaelcross4oregon.com. That's the number 4oregon.com. You know, I served honorably in the United States military, and I've always wanted to serve. And, you know, basically, I think it harkens back to as a Boy Scout, even just leaving things nicer than how you got it, than when you arrived. And the same holds true for Oregon. I see many things happening in a beautiful state that I've come to call home for most of my life. And I see what's going on as frankly, just terrible. And I see that the state that we know and love being destroyed. And so I want to put my talents and abilities to use to turn things around. And that's as a chief executive officer, chief operations officer, project manager, operations manager. I think I mentioned that. Just, you know, most of my life I've been in business. I know how things work. I know how to get things done on a tight budget, and I know how to get results in the fastest way possible. Meaningful change that that people can see in even a short time span. Even in my first term as Attorney General, we'd see many improvements in our state. And so I didn't see anyone else stepping up for the challenge. And so that's why I that I felt was qualified and competent to do this role. And trust me, there's other things I'd rather be doing. I mean, let's go camping or let's go fishing but I love Oregon. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. And after, what I saw, the travesties of justice having to do with the COVID closures and the attacks on people's ways of life, their businesses, I had to step up and do something. So that's why I'm running. Thank you.
Thank you. And Will, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity. I appreciate it. I've dedicated my whole adult life and my career to protecting people on the margins from violence and protecting children, particularly. My first job as a lawyer was as a prosecutor in Yamhill County. Then I went to Marion County shortly thereafter and joined their special victims unit and was a child sex abuse prosecutor for a number of years. I also handled cases of adult sexual assault and domestic violence, human trafficking, drug trafficking, and even homicide. But my major focus when I was in Oregon as a prosecutor was on protecting children from violence. And then I went on and took a role at the national level doing that, living in Alexandria in the DC area. And then I ran into an organization called IJM, which is the world's largest anti-human trafficking organization. And they asked me to lead multinational teams in Africa. So for the last 8 years, I've been living first in East Africa, working on gender-based violence, working with the government to really protect widows and widows' land rights, but it boiled down to gender-based violence. And then most recently living in Ghana, working with the government there to combat child trafficking, which is a huge issue. We also partnered with the UN and partnered with the US State Department to go into the Middle East to rescue women who had been trafficked for labor or for sex. And so my whole career has been very focused on protecting people from violence. And I've always been a resident of Oregon, and each year I would come back for a month or two, and just watching the decay of law and order and governance in the state of Oregon over the last decade has been like watching the frame by frame by frame death of a state. And when it's something that it can't be denied that there's just been a failure of leadership and a failure to protect. So I feel duty bound to come back and use my skill set, my unique skill set, to help bring protection and safety back to Oregonians. I know that what you see on the street or what you see in your communities that disturbs virtually everybody, Republican or Democrat, right now, is just a silhouette of what children are experiencing behind closed doors in the dark shadows. Our legislature has stripped law enforcement. When I say law enforcement, I mean police and prosecutors and social workers of the resources, the manpower, and the tools to protect people who are vulnerable. And so we have a whole new class of crime victims and exploitation that have happened recently. And I want to be a part of a wave of new leadership that's actually going to do something about that.
So let's talk about that a little bit more. Can you tell me how you would use the Office of the Attorney General to do that, to address kind of the lawlessness that you see, and some of the, talk about some of your priorities that you would take on as AG if elected?
Is that question for me or
Yes,
Mr.?
I'm sorry. Yes, and we'll just kind of bounce back and forth. But if you
Yeah.
could start off.
Okay, I would say you should address it to the bald guy, but I think in this case that would just it wouldn't clear anything up. So yes, so the Attorney General does a lot of things, and criminal justice isn't one of them. But criminal justice is really sort of the core function of the Attorney General as Oregon's top cop, and most notably, the Attorney General by statute is supposed to run point on all organized crime, and organized crime includes drug trafficking, human trafficking, organized retail theft, racketeering, and the list goes on. And Oregon has a real organized crime problem right now because fentanyl is not made in Oregon, and that's well documented. It's mostly made and manufactured in China, processed in Mexico, and brought to the state by a highly organized drug cartel and distributed by criminal organizations. That we have an organized crime problem in Oregon, and fentanyl is the biggest issue. It's the public crisis of the day, and we have a steady flow coming into our state. And it's the Attorney General's role to build a strategy, build collaboration between resources, the federal government, and Interpol to start pushing the supply back. And that's what I plan to do.
So I would like to kind of dig into that a little bit more, but Michael, if you can kind of jump in a little bit with what your priorities were, how you would use the AG's office to address some of the concerns that you noted in your introduction.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting because, excuse me, we've got obviously, the fentanyl crisis, the homeless crisis, some corruption going on, maybe a blend of, drug profiteering and perhaps some elected officials. I mean, there was a thing with Shamia Fagan, and there's, voices out there saying that, that company that she was accepting money from is tied in with the cartel. So, the AG's role is a large role, and you have to be willing to go wherever the facts lead and be, not be pressured or, cajoled into backing off. I mean, if a crime's been committed and, it happens to be an elected person, the trail doesn't stop there. So, unlike my opponent, I don't have a law license that they can hold over my head. If I, press further type of a thing. What comes to mind is, going back, I don't know, what was it, 30 years with the murder of Randy Franke, when the governor hired him to, deal with the corruption in the Department of Corrections. And I'm not suggesting that there's any corruption in the Department of Corrections, but that man ended up dead. So if they're willing to, murder somebody that's chasing after corruption in state governance, it seems to me that they would certainly threaten somebody with their law license. I mean, so I don't have that. I don't have any children. Remember when the Glamour Salon, when she dared stay open during the COVID closure, in spite of the governor's orders to remain closed. And the next thing that business owner knew was Child Services Division was knocking at her front door, on a frivolous case of abuse against her children. Now, whether she should or shouldn't have been open, that's another subject. But what I'm saying is that if you're going against the narrative, they will pull out the stops to get you. And, my children are grown, so that's certainly not a threat with me. And, I think that dealing with what we're dealing with, that's definitely a concern. And I'm willing to go to these things. I mean, what's going on with these unlicensed pot grows that are being busted? I mean, it was talked about in a recent publication this last December. They just, when they know the raid is going to happen, how they know the raid is going to happen is beyond me. They just kill the slave laborers that they have. And then the investigators, when they come upon the scene, find these dead bodies. So, it's a huge task, and we need to be brave. And I just, if Will gets the nomination and he ends up winning in November, Godspeed. But I don't know that he has what it takes to make the final push to make some real change in Oregon, is my point.
Okay. Will, let's talk a little bit more about just kind of your focus on fentanyl and what you as AG can do. How would you, I mean, would you look to be restructuring what the AG does? Would you be kind of pulling back on certain functions that it's currently responsible for, or would you be seeking a whole lot of new resources?
Yeah, I think the Attorney General's office is about a $780 million budget hit for the state of Oregon, and that's more than doubled since I left in my time serving overseas. So I don't think I'll be asking for more money. It's really repurposing resources and putting the right people in the right spots to reactivate the criminal justice division. The current AG, I don't think it's been a real secret, hasn't had a real passion for public safety and criminal justice, and that division is not fully empowered to do what it can do. And so that's the first thing I'm going to work on.
Okay. And I guess what I'm wondering is just sort of like, how do you envision kind of leading a strategy that's addressing fentanyl?
Yeah, so you gotta the Attorney General's office is gonna have to rebuild relationships with sheriffs and chief of police across the state and district attorneys, get everybody on the same page, get a collective strategy together, start sharing information, become very organized, because drug cartels are very organized and they're making millions of dollars off of exploiting addiction and crushing families and communities. And the Attorney General is a lot like the coach, and without a coach, you can have really great players, but they're not really working together. They're not functioning well as a team. And that's my first order of business, is getting everybody on the same page and then plugging in to the other agencies outside of Oregon that are important to taking on an international crime. These are things I did in human trafficking. This is what I've been doing for the last 8 years. I'm really the only candidate on either side that has any experience in doing something like this. And I not only have experience at doing it, I was very successful.
Okay, thank you. And also just kind of, one of the things that the AG is going to be confronting is, well, actually the entire state is going to be looking at, is how to evolve the criminal justice system under the changes with HB 4002, rolling back elements of Measure 110, trying to set up these deflection systems. I'm curious, kind of, Michael, why don't we start with you on this? Do you have any thoughts or ideas in terms of what the AG should or should be doing to either support counties or lead on how to create a deflection system for that counties can implement?
Well, certainly I wouldn't want to, local law enforcement knows best how to deal with their local issues. So I would want to work, hand in hand with them and be as a partnership, leveraging their relationships and abilities in their local municipalities and counties, because I think that's going to be the better method to resolving this. And if they need resources outside of their county, kind of bridging that gap so that the state can provide needed assistance or facilitating this budget. I mean, $780 million in their budget seems like a lot of money. And like Will said, it's doubled. So, maybe some of that money would be better spent in the various counties. I mean, that are having some of the worst, issues. I mean, we can't control what the federal government does or doesn't do as it pertains to, our southern border issues. But what we can do is protect Oregon to the best that we can.
Do you have any specific thoughts or ideas, though, about just like the kind of deflection system, or what role the AG's office should take in kind of figuring that out?
Well, I mean, like I said, I mean, I would want to, leave it mainly to the counties, but provide, to the extent that they need assistance outside of their, what they have in their abilities, basically working hand in hand with the state level and the county level at the same time.
And Will, what about you in terms of just as we enter this kind of new era of
Right.
trying to manage our drug addiction issues? What thoughts do you
Yeah.
have regarding deflection or the AG's role?
Yeah, the mechanics of that, it's going to be interesting to play out because a lot of it is up to counties to figure out, and it's going to be interesting to see where all that goes. The things that come to mind for me, the two top of the mind for me is one is you just looking around Portland or any metro area, vandalism, graffiti, that's against the law. Dealing drugs, that's against the law. Organized retail theft, that's against the law. What House Bill 4002 does is it essentially, in sort of its own creative way, recriminalizes the use of hard drugs in Oregon, but it's just another law. Like we have a law enforcement problem, not a law creation problem. We can make all the laws in the world, but we're really struggling to stay on actually holding people accountable. So it'll be interesting to see how that rolls out at the statewide level, whether or not that we can actually enforce that law. As far as the Attorney General's role in all of this, one of the key functions of the Attorney General is policing public officials and whether or not they're acting corruptly or acting on the public's behalf. And there's just been a alarming amount of unexplained expenditures and unexplained funds in the addiction arena and the homelessness arena, and nobody seems to be chasing the leads when we have unreceipted money on audits. And so I think the Attorney General's role is really on the accountability end of that money. We need to get that money to treatment. It needs to be driven to deflection programs. Everybody has the same goal in mind. That's not to throw people suffering from addiction into jail. It's to try to use leverage to get them into treatment, to get them healthy and get them productive again. And if our money's not getting to the right place, it won't work. So that's probably my major focus as an Attorney General, is making sure that the money is accounted for.
Um, let's talk about just kind of past experience and how it would relate to this role. Whoever is Attorney General will be overseeing a budget of hundreds of millions with hundreds of staff members. There's multiple roles in terms of representing various agencies as well as consumer protection, ensuring child support enforcement, and multiple other duties. What in your experience, and let's start with you, Will, prepares you for this? Why are you kind of well suited to step into that position?
Really well said, Helen. The Attorney General themselves is just the executive leader, the CEO of the largest law firm in the state of Oregon. It's a large entity, and the position is a leadership position, is what it is. And that's what I've been doing for the last 8 years. I've been in an executive leadership position, running multinational teams that are law enforcement oriented to results-driven objectives, towards collective objectives. So I'm probably the only candidate in the race that actually has executive leadership and a significant executive leadership experience, and have been doing that for some time.
And Michael, how about you? Why do you feel that, or what in your background prepares you to take on this leadership role of this complex organization with hundreds of employees?
Well, I mean, if we want to talk about executive leadership experience, I've got 30 plus years of executive leadership experience. I mean, we've got like, for instance, my homeless solution, my solution to the homeless crisis. I don't see or hear anybody else talking about solutions. They're just throwing band-aids at it, to the tune of millions of dollars. And it's not addressing the root cause of the problem. And the root cause of the problem is, aside from, the obvious homelessness, is drug addiction, not being gainfully employed, not having a roof over their heads, not having proper child care. Perhaps it's critical thinking skills. Maybe there's mental issues and, conflict resolution skills, things like this. And my plan, addresses all of those needs at, less than what Portland spends on an annual basis for graffiti removal of $20 million. So, it takes somebody that Will had said earlier in another meeting that he wasn't willing to legislate from the position. Well, I'm not willing to legislate from the position. I think there's a key disconnect. And just because it's been happening this way for decades doesn't make it right. It's my contention and my understanding of the Constitution that the state attorney general's office represents the people. The people is the government of Oregon, not the executive branch. And I hope Will understands that. Ellen Rosenblum, she didn't understand that. She thought that she was the governor's lawyer. If that's the case, then why does everybody go and vote for the position? Why should we care which lawyer represents the governor if that person is not representing Oregonians? And I think that it removes any conflict of interest with me not having a law license. I certainly understand the law, but, I mean, it kind of creates, in a way, a conflict of interest if you have a bar license. And I think wisely so. That's why our founding fathers didn't require you to have a law license, was because they wanted somebody unfettered by, these constraints and the expectations of somebody in the club. If you're an average person, then you're not in the club because you don't have a bar license.
So let me ask you. So you talked about homelessness. How does that relate to the role of the Attorney General? How do you see that being part of what the AG should be focusing on?
Well, I mean, if it's probably hardest hit, I don't know, in Multnomah County. Maybe some could argue it's hardest hit in Lane County or Jackson County, but probably, my guess is Multnomah County. And so what this does, and the reason it's something that the Attorney General needs to focus on, is because of, number one, the people involved. I mean, aside from just, this is the right thing to do. We're talking about millions, potentially, billions of dollars that are, this is destroying property values in Multnomah County. It's destroying property values wherever it's happening, commercial property, and it's kind of what happens when somebody goes down the road of, hard drug use, or, maybe they lost their home and now, the myriad of reasons. And, this is an easy fix in my view. And it's something that private corporations can partner up with because it's the right thing to do, but also long term, it's going to benefit them and it's going to benefit their state that they're in. I mean, my plan is similar to the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps program 80 years ago. The only difference is that it involved private industry at the same time.
Okay, and I apologize, but because homelessness is not within the core responsibilities of the AG, that's not really kind of an area that I want to go too much further into. I guess I'm just wondering, like, about what your concept of what the AG's role is. I guess, do you you talked about just the issues regarding representing the people and not representing agencies. Are there other aspects that you think that the AG should be focused on then?
Well, I mean, it's crime. There's a lot of crime there, and clearly it's not something that can come from the local level because the problem is too big. And so I think that the solution should come from the state level in cooperation with, as I said, local law enforcement and these other corporations. I mean, Nike, Intel, Precision Cast Parts, all these manufacturing companies, we're blessed with having that in Oregon. And, they'd have a financial tax incentive to be involved with this. Obviously, the legislature would have to be on board with this plan. And it is an ambitious plan, but, certainly across the board, I believe absolutely, it's going to reduce crime if we can solve the homeless issue in Oregon.
Okay. Okay. Let's see. Well, let me ask you, are there other aspects of the AG's job right now that you would do differently than Ellen Rosenblum is now? For instance, any aspect of there have been, her office convenes the opioid settlement prevention task force. There's also consumer protection as part of it, the nonprofit and charities oversight. What is there an element of another aspect of the job that you would do differently?
Well, let me start to say by that because some parts of the system are broken doesn't mean that all parts of the system are broken. So I think the first role of the Attorney General is to go in and assess how effective the different divisions are and what they're doing. The thing that's sort of the burning fire, the thing that's on top of the mind for all Oregonians right now is crime. And so that's what we're going to talk most about in this campaign. But I think there are also some issues when it comes to consumer protection. We've done a really great job at being willing to go after major corporations, and you've undoubtedly seen the splashy headlines around that. I think in that overemphasis on going out protecting consumers that have been exploited by major corporations has left consumers that have had bad experiences with smaller businesses or been exploited in less, I guess, media-friendly ways. I think we've left a lot of those consumers by the wayside. We have done a horrible job with victims' rights in Oregon over the last decade. We used to lead the country about a decade ago in victims' rights, and we have given it away. And so we need to reemphasize and reorganize the Victim Rights Division to once victims of crime need to have their constitutional voice, and they need to be heard, and they need to be compensated well. And the state agencies need to follow the law. That's just the bottom line, is the unique juxtaposition between the governor and the AG is that the governor has the state agencies underneath her, and the Attorney General plays an important role of making sure that those state agencies stay within their legislative power and don't grow the executive power beyond what is intended by the legislature. And so that'll be focused on doing that.
And finally, Republicans have not won the AG's office for decades. So I'm curious, and Will, if you would be willing to go first on this, why are you the person to change that dynamic?
You know, this is a partisan position. It shouldn't be a partisan position. This would be a nonpartisan position. This is a law enforcement position, not a law creation position. And when it comes to law enforcement, actually Republicans do quite well in the state of Oregon. Oregonians trust Republicans over Democrats in most instances to enforce the law. So I think I start on my home field advantage. And I think right now people aren't looking for a Democrat and they're not looking for a Republican. They're looking for somebody that's going to fix problems, because as I've traveled the state over the last 14 or 15 months in my campaign, I've noted that we have more unity in this state than I can ever remember in my lifetime. Everybody's a little bit miserable, and they're looking for somebody who has some solutions and is going to get Oregon off its knees and get into a better spot. And I have a very practical experience in law enforcement. I've had a lot of success in that, and a lot of success as a leader. And I think that this year, more than any year, people are going to be looking for leadership that's going to change. And you can't just keep running the same candidates for the different positions and expect any change in the state of Oregon.
And Michael, how about you? Why do you think that you'd be the one to break the streak?
What's the adage? Definition of insanity is keep doing the same thing and expect different results, right? So when I ran in 2020, I mean, I'm a known element as far as people know that I have no problem going up against the governor with the flush down Kate Brown recall effort that I did in 2019. But of course, I ran in 2020 with really no backing, just several $1,000s, nothing really much to speak of. And in spite of all of that, I got 15% more votes than Daniel Crow did, the Republican nominee 4 years prior. And mind you, Daniel Crow was a West Point law graduate, of course, an attorney, very sharp guy, actually. We spoke on the phone. And then after he and I had a very nice conversation, he decided to withdraw his candidacy and let me have it in May. Apparently, he felt confident in my abilities. And I stayed true to form. And come November, as I mentioned, I got 15% more votes than he did in Multnomah County alone. In the 4 years prior. And, if you want to compare me with other Republicans in November of 2020, Kim Thatcher, who's well-known, certainly well-known name in the Republican circles, current elected official, when she was seeking the office of Secretary of State, she only got 40,000 more votes than I did. So I'm very electable. If there's anybody watching this that wants to, make a donation to, a trusted source and somebody that's going to be a good backing in November, that would be me in my estimation, based on the results. The numbers don't lie. So I am a fighter. I do know the Constitution. I've got it right here. This is my basis. For instance, this stuff that they're trying to pass now, going against backyard farmers. If you're raising a couple of chickens or you've got a small farm and you're going to the Saturday market, you're a target now. Well, that seems to me that perhaps it's, somebody has too much time and resources on their hands and they're focusing in the wrong direction. And certainly that wouldn't be my focus as Attorney General.
Great, thank you. Zane, if you have any questions, you're welcome to jump in.
Not at this time, but thank you.
Great. Thank you both for taking time to talk with us today. I will be in touch with any additional questions, but this was really an interesting discussion. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Helen.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks for your time, everyone.